Laura is working closely with Larry on this. The idea is that we can share some of the questions and some of the tentative answers that we develop in this evening in something that can be more broadly distributed.
Yeah, the Teaching Negotiation Resource Center at PON tries to cull from these once a semester conversations about pedagogy some of the reactions and ideas and suggestions and put them into a single, relatively short video distributed through the TNRC, the clearinghouse at PON, and thus our video team doing their best to keep track of what you are saying. We will edit it later and not show it to you, and then it will be available online and you can see it then. Michael's going to say a little bit about the process by which we put the paper together that you were sent and that you have on the table if you haven't as yet looked at it. I'm going to just remind everyone of what our goal or goals this evening look like. The negotiation pedagogy activity at PON tries to bring together as many people as possible from the PON community to talk about how we teach, what we teach, why we teach the way we do. And this time, Michael and I thought it would be a good moment to try to get as many people as possible to talk about how you assess both whether your students are learning what you think you're teaching and how you're doing teaching that material. It turns out that in the negotiation realm in particular, there's a lot less organized thought captured in written form on these subjects than we had imagined. And so we didn't have any place to go to try to lay out various ideas that had been written and documented in some way. And so Michael and Laura took it upon themselves to interview a number of people, some of them in this room. We promised everybody anonymity, but should you care in conversation to own up to being one of the people who was interviewed, if it's not already obvious the way people are described generically in the paper to others of us who know everyone in the room, that's your choice whether you want to say something or not. But we wanted
just a quick thought. The reason for that, we just wanted people to have liberty to think out loud and then hear other people and say, you know, on second thought. So not that there are any state secrets involved, but we wanted this to be generative in the same way we want that to happen this evening.
Right. And we weren't looking for some kind of quantitative assessment of how many people do measure their performance this way or their students' performance that way. We wanted to get at some of people's thinking about why they assess what they do the way they do. And so Michael and Laura transcribed the interviews and put together the paper that you have. And in a moment, I'm going to ask Michael to highlight what he thinks the most important or interesting findings were from those conversations. But again, you have the paper to read and take with you. It's a big problem if you stop and take this seriously. How do we assess whether our students are learning what we intend to be teaching, and how do we assess our performance relative to their performance? Because we are very different students even in the same classes, different level of background, different level of effort, different level of importance attached in the same class to what's being taught. And so students vary, and both in terms of their self-awareness, their capacity to learn, and thus their ability to report. All of us are obviously painfully familiar with what passes for evaluation of instruction, not just negotiation instruction, in our various schools. You know, give it a 1 to a 5. You know, I'll give it a 4 because I can dance to it. Great, we have an average 4.6, we're great. That's the end of it. and then that gets put in people's files, and then when faculty get reviewed for promotion, I had a 4.6 out of 5 average on the 6 subjects I taught. And that's it. There's really not anything like the level of investment in both knowing how we're doing and experimenting to try to do better and documenting how those experiments go that you would expect. If another industry that we were advising put this level, this little bit of effort into trying to improve through R&D what it was doing, we would say they are doomed, right, to fail, and yet the university gets away with it and nobody seems too worried about it. We are convinced it's worth spending more time on it, and thus the activity this evening. The third point is one, and you'll see it mentioned by at least one of the people that we interviewed, who's here tonight. Not everybody in a class should be assumed to start at the same place or have to achieve the same objective in a negotiation class. So what does that say about how we evaluate? Do we need an individualized metric and evaluation procedure for each and every person in every class, not just for every class? That's a puzzle. We know that negotiation is popular, and some people use that as a measure of how wonderfully they're teaching. I'm not sure that that should be allowed. I think negotiation would be popular even if we taught badly. One, because word doesn't get out till after it's too late for the student, but also because in some instances, students have very low expectations. And so the fact that we met those, that shouldn't be good enough. The classes are popular, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to strive to know how we're doing and how we could do better. One of the things we want to end with this evening is a potential list of things that the Program on Negotiation through the TNRC might undertake as a series of activities in an effort to develop new materials, new strategies, new partnerships aimed at generating and testing new kinds of methods, techniques, strategies for this purpose. So we will have some time toward the end of the evening where we'll ask people at tables to put a little time in. We've provided a provisional list just to illustrate some of the kinds of things that might be starters for that conversation, but then we will try to collect some ideas, and I very much hope that TNRC could actually commit to try to work with those of you who would like to work together on this to produce various kinds of techniques, strategies, forms, devices that we could use to do better at this. So, Michael, the floor is yours.
Let me just add a few things, and we want to spark a conversation. I see Susan and James there. Maybe a dozen years ago, we were in Paris for a conference of a couple hundred teachers. Melissa, but maybe everybody in the room was there. But I happened to be looking at you two, and I gave a talk, I hope a little bit provocative, where the question was, is teaching negotiation too easy, too hard, or both? And we've been through some of the reasons why one might say the latter here. I think in both, well, Gordon and I may be toe-to-toe in terms of birth certificates or whatever, but I've got some longevity here. And if you think about the centuries of experience that are in this room teaching negotiation, it's a whole lot. There are also some people who've only taught it for a few years who are doing brilliant work. So I come to this question, Larry's the optimist, I'm not the pessimist, but the skeptic, and the hope is that if we're more reflective and more demanding of ourselves, we can do an even better job. as Larry said, Laura did some of the interviews, I did others. I want to just give you a couple of quick impressions, and then we can develop this. I was interested, if we go here, there's the questions that we put to people, as we described in the note that was circulated, and that's posted as well. Asking people to be self-reflective so that they have some sense of how they've done in a given class, in a given course, how that's changed over time, where their priorities are in looking at indices of success, and taking a remove, what if you're watching somebody else, what you would be looking for, what's good coaching in this realm. So the conversations were very open-ended. As Larry said, we weren't asking people to scale things in any serious way. But a couple of themes came out that were nearly universal. Larry touched on the inadequacy of end-of-semester surveys. Don't have to belabor why that is, but nobody seems to be entranced with those. They're a fact of life. What interested me is I didn't hear from the people with whom I spoke much enthusiasm either for conventional exams. There was a time where you'd present people with a case and you'd ask them to analyze it. I've seen good examples of that, and I'm looking at one that you developed on a congressional negotiation that I think asked a lot about negotiation and whether people could analyze from a distance. Whether they can do it in real time in context is another matter. There does seem to be, in a more general way, a very deep interest in people's reflections and supposedly divining from that some sense of their learning. These can be through conventional journals. It can be through the kind of stuff that some of us do online now. Still, though, that calls into question as to whether we're biased towards people who are naturally self-reflective or have the discipline to question their own thinking. Some people teach small classes and have the luxury of seeing videos of their students negotiate. Ideally, it'd be nice, this was something that Bruce raised, to have transcripts and doing a really rigorous analysis of the language that they use, identify kind of critical factors, and whether there's movement from the beginning of the semester to the last. I don't know that anybody has taken that on. Maybe we should. A lot of self-assessment, a lot of peer work, and both the giving advice and the receiving advice can be measures of learning on their part, and on our part, setting up an environment that is hospitable to that kind of learning. When I say some people have the luxury of small classes, not everybody does. Some people have the luxury of teaching assistants, and even with resources the Harvard Business School has, we don't have TAs. As a matter of policy, we don't have TAs. I understand why that is, but there's a cost attendant to it. So when we look here at one teacher who has the ability to get to know her students very well, there really can be tailored learning so people get assignments that are addressing areas that may not be their greatest strength. Then we asked, as I said before, about if you were a mentor, if you were brought into somebody else's class, what would you be looking at to identify what somebody is doing well as a teacher and what they might do better? And maybe the first question is, what kind of advice does the person think that they need? What is their agenda? What are they trying to do in class? And to make I hesitate to use the word evaluation, but I can't come up with a near synonym, to form an impression that's based on what their aspirations and goals are. So that's how we work through here. We have some very general and abbreviated suggestions here about what we might do, but how do we judge among them? you've had an introduction from Larry. You've had, I hope, a not too long summary of what we saw in the interviews. I want to thank the people who took a considerable amount of time with us to share their thoughts and to raise questions. All but one of the 6 people that we spoke with is in the room. Somebody else is out of the city, and we'll see this on tape. But I think we ought to open up the discussion, and I'm wondering, maybe you can help me out with the if we can loosely stay on these themes as we go through, reserving time at the end, and not 5 minutes either, to say if we're really being bold and wanted to look hard at what we do and create a methodology, a template for ourselves that can be shared with others in terms of how we know that what we intend is really getting traction. That's where we want to end up. And there can be plenty of question marks in that as well. We don't have the capacity to record the discussion on a whiteboard, but it's being recorded, and we will do we'll do a transcription of it and work carefully through it. End of monologues, beginning of dialogues. If we start with that first question, others who haven't been in the conversation, you walk out of class, or you are at the end of semester, you take the micro or the macro. How do you know if you're teaching well? How do you know what you could do to teach even better? What questions do those questions raise? Yes, and help me out. I don't know everybody's name. I should. One more time.
So Bob Loft is part
Yes,
of the
Bob,
school.
of course, yeah.
So I think the first question, I think this gets to a couple of questions at once. The first question is, what is it you're trying to teach? So one of my frustrations when I teach, so my course is focused on government-to-government negotiations, how they work, how you perform as part of a team, which could be very different from what somebody's doing on mediation or business negotiations. A lot of different variations. So first thing I try to think is, what is it that I want them to know when they come out of my course? You know, I want them to understand, for example, that government-to-government negotiations cover a number of interests that aren't always compatible, that the majority of your negotiations are with your own side. The role of a delegation leader as leader and manager, not just negotiator. And I actually use a couple of things. One, I do, and I've experimented, I'm still trying to figure out exactly how to measure this, but I do a traditional test, and I ask them very basic concepts about pre-negotiation, team building, things of that nature, and try to get an understanding. Do they even understand those key concepts? Understanding BATNA, for example, that for me has become a central part of the way that I look at what they've learned. Because quite frankly, if they can describe, for example, a reasonable BATNA on a historical negotiation, that tells me that they can understand the interest involved, and they understand the complexities of that particular negotiation. I'm still not quite satisfied with that, but I always come away thinking, okay, there are about 15 other things that I should be teaching in this course that I don't have time for, and that I just try to direct them, okay, here's some areas of further study.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Larry and I distinguished the teaching about in contrast to teaching how. I think the about is certainly necessary, but it's not sufficient necessarily if you're hoping to actually enabling people to do this well. Are you taking the about as basically your principal charge?
So my first responsibility, I think, in this course is to teach them how government-to-government negotiations work. Within that, there is, okay, how do you negotiate? So I run, like I think almost everybody here does, I run a series of simulations. And then we talk about what happens during those simulations, and each one builds on both the lessons and on the previous negotiations. So we start on very simple bargaining, team building, bilateral, multilateral, and we, so part of it's based on that's actually the hardest part, because as you've pointed out here, people come in with a very, I've got some students who, like I got one student right now who is a used car salesman. Mm-hmm. Okay, he comes in with, a fair amount of experience on bargaining. I've had students who have worked for NGOs. I've had students who've done similar type of work, and I have students who basically it's dealing with dad as an adolescent about, what are my curfew hours? Mm-hmm. And I have students who are extraordinarily shy, who will not take on any sort of role, and I have students who are very outgoing. And I can't grade them, assess them, judge them on the same scale. Kind of look at where's their starting point, mm-hmm. and try to assess their ability to grow and take on these lessons. Quite frankly, that's why I'm here tonight, because I am at a loss on that one.
We'll get others in the conversation. Last question, how many people in your class?
No more than 24.
Lucky you, lucky you. On this first question, Josh?
So, so in the courses that we have course out. So we have in the program we have programmatic outcomes. So at the end of a 2-year master's degree, there is a series of outcomes that we're hoping that they're going to achieve, and that's the whole goal. And then within each course, there's course outcomes that fit into the programmatic outcomes. What we started doing last year was we actually have them do something called an e-portfolio. And an e-portfolio is really a way of them capturing their learning from a theoretical skills, other concepts idea. And so at the end of each class, there's a page or two template that they fill in that says, these are the key theories that I took away from this, these are the key concepts, these are the key skills, and whatever else. And what we've done is we've taken that and looked at what they were pulling from the class and whether that matched with what it was that we were intending in terms of course outcomes. And if not, then we start to think, okay, so how do we then modify and adjust, because they're clearly taking away something that we weren't expecting. Or if it aligns, then that's great. And I would just say in a similar way, the university where I teach has a range of students. It's not like Harvard. There's a real range of students. So we cannot judge them on a similar scale. Like when they come into the program, we all sort of, as faculty, do a bit of an assessment of and looking for growth as individuals within that. Because there's no way to sort of have a cookie cutter model and say, this is where everyone's gonna be at the end of the program. They all have sort of their own ceiling that they can reach.
So just so everybody knows, Josh is sitting next to Melissa. Talk about early adopters. Larry and I are late to the party in terms of online instruction. All of your teaching is online, Josh?
Now it is, yeah, the whole program is online.
Now it is, and so the E&E learning is embedded in a larger environment where you're doing
Correct.
this kind of thing.
Yep.
Larry, you had a comment, question?
So you ask someone to fill out this report. They say, I got this, and this. And you say, great, that was my intention. Mm-hmm. How do you know they got it?
Well, I think we know that they got it in terms of the level of detail because they're given an opportunity to write as much as they want. But for example, the first class is an intro to negotiation class. So we don't expect them to be going into great detail after one class. But what we can do is we can take the intro to negotiation class, and then we take the 10th class in the program and begin to compare the level of the depth of their analysis as they're explaining what they're taking away.
And just want to be clear,
Is that-
by class you mean session, is that correct? 10th session?
Well, they're classes, so it would be like a normal course. So there are 12 classes in the degree program
Okay,
that they have to complete.
I see.
Is that, Larry, does that, I mean,
Um,
it doesn't get probably to the kind of granular nature of really deep understanding, but
To me, this is the fundamental conceptual dilemma, which is we can be real explicit about what we want to know, what we want students to learn. We can have a lesson plan or something like it that's how we think we're going to teach that. We can ask them, do you think you know this? And they could say yes, and you could say, well, if you know about it, you should be able to answer these questions, and they can. And then if we say, but do you know how to do it in another circumstance, I don't see how they're supposed to know that, and I don't know how we're going to know it based on their answer to the question.
We'll get other people in the conversation. Melissa first?
So direct follow-up to actually all of these comments. So for a few years, I was asked to be the college-wide director of learning assessment at Babson. And I had to learn, I think because I had a background in education, but I had to learn about what does it mean to do assessment at the programmatic level and the college level. And what I learned was, from the accreditor's point of view, there's indirect assessment and there's direct assessment, and this is what Larry's getting at, I think. Indirect assessment is what people report that they know, but direct assessment is looking at what they actually know because they're demonstrating that they know it, because they're doing it. And so I think partly from that experience, and partly from what I've learned through my ed degree, is that I found it really, really helpful to describe, to frame learning goals, learning outcomes for anything, whether it's a course or an exec ed session or anything, in terms of not what do I want people to know, but what do I want them to be able to do. So every single learning outcome that I list for a course or for a session or anything is described in terms of behavior. So not just I want them to know what BATNA means, but maybe I want them to be able to recognize a BATNA in a hypothetical, or develop a BATNA in a certain negotiation, something like that. So in terms of behavior, and then that, if you describe your learning goals in terms of what people can do, that leads to very different kinds of assessment. You actually ask them to perform those behaviors. It's a little harder, but I think you have a better sense of what they're actually able to do than just what they know conceptually.
What are you actually monitoring when you're looking for what they now know how to do? What is this filling a template in the way that Joss
Well,
said, or
so
is it
some of the
observation?
examples you gave were me, or at least partly me. So I mean, I do, I video record. I have them use webcams to video record their negotiations, and I have them select out clips, and I have them analyze and evaluate what they're doing. But when I give them feedback, I'm giving them feedback not just on their analysis and their evaluation, but on their actual negotiation behavior. I have them do the paper, you had it up there on the other slide, the paperclip exercise where they're trading a paperclip for something and something else. Because one of my learning goals is I want them to be able to create value. So I give them an exercise where they have to go create value actually outside the classroom. They have to do it. And so they're partly graded on the value that they create, in addition to their ability to analyze why they were able to do it.
This is the example of somebody who traded a paperclip up through a series of steps to a flat screen TV.
Yeah.
The deadline.
By the way, not mine. This is from
This is a book.
Northwestern, and
Yeah.
I mean, this is not my original exercise at all.
I'm just thinking, why stop there? I mean, but I'm curious, how many people in the room at some point, maybe not every semester, but actually at some point see video of their students negotiating? Hands up. Wow. And I'm saying wow to Andy. Andy's got 60 plus students in a class. That's work. That's work in that regard. And no TAs. So, David?
When I have the energy to do it, because it is so time consuming. The semester has the things I want them to be able to do, and we talk about them, and there's some exercises. I don't have time to provide feedback for all of them all the way through the semester. But the final is a negotiation, a role play with video, with me observing that and then going over with them the video together what were you doing, how did you see it, and let them provide whatever vocabulary from the course or not from the course that they want. But I'm also interested in the what were you thinking when you did. Now, this is a tricky one. This is, it's got the same self-serving, what about memory kinds of issues that you were raising, but it's the closest I know how to get to. And I say, well, when you moved there, what did you think? Or equally, I'm also interested in, when he did that, how did you react? What did you think he meant? How did you feel? Did that put pressure on you, even given that it's a role play? I mean, there's enough role play, it's the final and I'm sitting there. They don't need more pressure. But I try and get at both, what are you thinking, or what were you thinking? And that usually triggers a lot of, well, I probably wasn't thinking this, but this would have been an interesting thing to think. And, well, but the reason that's important to me is I think of that final as another class we're teaching, not as something separate that looks back on and says, okay, it's all done now, can you jump 5'2"? So that the fact that they may be making it up in that moment is okay with me, as long as they're making up something that seems within some bounds. I figured they got something somewhere, even if just now they recalled, oh, that must have been what he was talking about in the third class. I better say that here.
Just as a little annotation, I have a different kind of final, but I also view that as a learning experience, and I'm very explicit on that. But tell me this, David, we're talking about over the years, how have you changed in the way you measure your success? If you had the luxury of having, pick a number, as many very bright people serve as your acolytes so that they are monitoring more of these videos,
Right.
but they hadn't taught negotiation before,
Oh.
what would they have to know first? Before, in other words, I'm wondering how you scale this up. I'm wondering what you can delegate. I'm wondering what's in your head and mind, having done this for a while.
Scaling up is not an issue I've worked on, so I'm going to have to make that one up as I go along. I think technology has some role here. I think the ability to have various people look at the same video and talk about it. One of the things I've never done that I've wanted to do, which may get to the scaling up, is do comparisons, let people watch 3 different pairs deal with the same moment,
Does anybody
and then
do,
be able to get at that.
does
I've never
anybody
done
do
that, but
Larry
it's always
doesn't?
been in my head, gee, that would be neat. It may be that one could scale that up by having multiple groups without having to have me sitting there for every one of them, because one of the variables is my energy level. How much time am I going to put into this game?
Larry?
The way Michael's framed it is about teaching assistants. But why shouldn't we be having all of our students be the co-learners and co-instructors with all the other students? Why don't we invest in developing the template and the method and teach our students to give each other feedback? Then you can have this army of folks in the class who are fully apprised of what's going on. Be the ones to constantly give peer feedback that we have helped to instruct them to do.
I'll be with you in just a moment, but this does segue nicely. Bruno, do you mind a warm call, not a cold call? Because Bruno is doing some very interesting things on this of enlisting undergraduates as TAs, which sort of defies the norm, which I think is a good thing. What can a 20-year-old teach a 19-year-old?
Well, a part of the process when I started teaching for me was to, and the question is, what are you teaching about? For me, negotiation is an opportunity for you to get to know yourself better, and a practice that challenges you to see your blind spots and the blind spots that other people may have, and that empowers you, if set correctly, to redefine who you are and grow. And at MIT, our undergraduates, whether they are, and I have students who are from freshmen to seniors. Prior to me taking over the class, it was mostly for seniors, and I said, no, let's have from all years. And sure enough, who they want to learn from is their peers. And the reason is that they are going through the same emotional challenges. and they share many of the similar dreams, and they respect one another in terms of the energy they put in. And so after I finished the first semester teaching, it was them who came to me and said, Bruno, we would love to continue to be involved with this field. How could we teach? And I saw that energy and said, I'm going to believe in it. I'm going to empower them to teach with me, and I'm not going to put them to do logistical stuff. I'm going to involve them in the journal coaching and in shaping the groups and in making sure that that person that has that fear plays that role and vice versa, and to bring all that energy into play. And so my undergraduate TAs, they are colleagues in the teaching. The students love that. That's how they describe them. And so the class is not only the 3 hours we meet during the week, but it's the conversation they have in the dorms and in the dinners and in their trips. And so all that information comes back to me. That roommate was dating that person, so they should not negotiate downs and blah, blah.
Are they looking at one another's videos? Are they
Yes.
doing that kind of critique?
Yes.
Because it seems to me part of if we're hoping to foster self-awareness and self-reflection, we're teaching people to look. And maybe it is easier to see those pivotal moments if they see other people doing it and they have the aha, oh, that happened to me. Or what would I do if that happened to me?
Well, so and it's been said, so in the class you're modeling how to provide feedback, and you're also modeling that feedback should be authentic and represent every single different personality in the room. And so the reason why I make sure that the groups are different and that the TAs coach is that through the videos, the students get to see a version of themselves that they don't know yet. And once and so I don't do it right away in the term. I do it once everybody, even those who are shy, have developed confidence and trust in the process of the simulations. So when they get to the point of the video, they're interested in looking at their body language. And in that first try, they discover that many of the things that they say, they communicate are not there, that many of the conflicts that they suddenly found themselves in are just a result of the faces that they make that they don't know. And if it happens with one good friend that you have in the class, then I'll see them then providing feedback to one another for 30 minutes when the class ended. And that's why you want, because in negotiation, at the end of the day, you have the blessing of being with them for 6 months, or not for a semester, but it's really 3 months. And the only way I believe they're gonna really learn in the long run and grow is if they wanna take these challenges and skills moving forward. If these books, they're gonna revisit them as they go by, and if the friends they have, they're gonna keep discussing these themes. And so it's the emotion that I want them to have after each class that drives how I gauge about how they feel, not the concepts.
Your hand was up, and if we
But,
can get...
thank you. This is just the conversation I hoped we could have. Do you have a...
Two things. Thanks to the people who volunteered to be interviewed. And thank you, Laura, for pulling this all together. A lot of work is involved in it. Please join me in thanking her. Have a nice evening. Thanks for your good work.